In the first module, I talked about the characteristics of a cloud service, and these included things like rapid elasticity and measured service. And these are great attributes of cloud computing. They enable us to do many wonderful things with the service. However, they also pose this risk: economic denial of sustainability, otherwise known as an EDoS attack. And what we're talking about here is the attacker trying to cause traffic to go to the site that results in the owner of the service incurring huge costs. Now, we just saw a variation of that by the guy who inadvertently published an AWS key to a public GitHub repository. But there are other ways of causing an EDoS attack to occur as well. We'll talk about those in just a moment, but let's first have a look at what sort of costs we're talking about. This is the Microsoft Azure pricing calculator, and it's a really good way of getting a sense of how much it might cost to run certain services. We're going to use it to get a sense of how much damage you could cause someone if you could get the services they're using to scale in a way that results in an EDoS attack. So for example, let's go down and we'll choose an app service. So this is Microsoft's interpretation of a website as a service instance. That's been added. Let's now scroll down and have a look at how much that might cost. We'll go and choose the standard tier, which is pretty typical for websites running on Azure, and it's going to cost about $74 a month. Now let's go over here and we're going to start adding instances. So instead of one, we might take 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. Now we're talking about $372 a month. So the question you need to ask in terms of the risk of EDoS is, how could you possibly cause someone to run 5 instances of the service instead of 1? Well, a service like Azure will scale out automatically if it's configured to do so. Indeed, this is a very popular way of setting up a website. Set up autoscale, and then if you have unexpected success through huge volumes of traffic coming to your site, you get more instances. You pay for them, but you've got this legitimate traffic, which is a good thing. But what if it wasn't legitimate traffic? So what if the attacker was manufacturing requests to the site that caused it to scale out, not due to legitimate traffic, but due to the specific request that the attacker was sending? What if instead the site was running on the premium tier and autoscale enabled you to go much higher? Suddenly, those costs start to really escalate. So what could possibly cause infrastructure to scale out this way? Well, you need to think about what creates overhead on the website. So for example, many web applications will use very slow hashing algorithms, which means that every time someone tries to log in, there's actually quite a bit of load on the infrastructure. If I was an attacker trying to mount an economic denial of sustainability attack on the victim's website, I'd be issuing as many simultaneous login requests as I possibly could. That's the sort of thing that's going to drive up CPU overhead and possibly trigger the infrastructure to scale out. Let's try something else. We'll go and add some bandwidth. And then we'll scroll back down and we'll see how much bandwidth we're going to use up. 5 gigabytes doesn't cost any money. But what if it was 5 terabytes? There goes $445. And then obviously as we consume more and more terabytes, the cost goes up even higher. Depending on the location you're in, those costs can be even higher again. So for example, down in Brazil, that's actually more than double the cost for the same amount of data, simply because those bandwidth costs are higher if the service is located in Brazil. Many cloud services will actually geo-distribute applications across the globe. So if you as an attacker can cause large volumes of data to exit the customer's Brazilian instance, you're effectively leveraging your impact in terms of that economic denial of sustainability. But how would you actually do this? Because the attacker doesn't want to be incurring the same costs themselves. The reality is, though, they usually wouldn't need to, because a pretty normal state of bandwidth charges with cloud providers is that you pay for egress data, so that's what we're looking at here, but you don't pay for ingress data. So if the attacker goes and stands up their own cloud service and then targets the victim by creating a script that downloads large volumes of data from that victim's cloud service into the attacker's cloud service, then the victim is seeing egress data, which has these costs, but the attacker is seeing ingress data, which frequently has no cost. They would simply go and identify resources on the website that were large images, documents, maybe movies, and then they'd download as many of them as they possibly could as fast as they could. Now that's a pretty simplistic example, and certainly there are ways that a victim could try and protect their assets from being attacked in this way. But equally, there are many different ways that an attacker can cause large volumes of data to exit a site, or a large number of requests to be sent to high overhead processors by distributing that load out in a way that's difficult to defend against. Now, this isn't a distributed denial of service in the classic sense. They're not necessarily wanting to take the service down. They're just trying to make it expensive to run. So that's EDoS. Let's go and look at something a bit different now, and that's hypervisor breakouts.